In the dusty town of Silverwater, New Mexico Territory, 1875, a former seminary student turned schoolteacher would become the most unlikely hero the West had ever seen. James Blackwood had never fired a gun in his life, but when his student was kidnapped by the West's most notorious outlaw, he would stop at nothing to bring her back, even if it meant hiring the deadliest gunfighter this side of the Mississippi. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning sun cast long shadows across Silverwater's main street as James Blackwood adjusted his wire-rimmed spectacles, nodding to the early risers making their way to the silver mine that gave the town its name. 6 months had passed since he'd left the comfortable confines of Philadelphia to bring education to this harsh territory, and still, the desert dust found ways to creep into his perfectly polished shoes. Every morning, he'd spend 10 minutes cleaning them, only to have them coated in a fine layer of red powder before reaching the schoolhouse. His daily routine began as it always did, stopping by Sheriff Hawkins's office to collect the weekly reading materials from back east. The sheriff, a weathered man with iron-gray hair and a reputation as sturdy as the mountains themselves, was already at his desk, boots propped up as he cleaned his revolver. "Mornin', Blackwood," Hawkins drawled, not looking up from his task. "The books you ordered came in. Might want to teach them kids something useful, like how to shoot straight or spot a rattler's nest." "Reading and arithmetic are useful skills, Sheriff," Blackwood replied, collecting the package. "Even in the West. Keep telling yourself that, son." Hawkins finally looked up, a hint of amusement in his steel blue eyes. "Just remember, out here sometimes the only grammar that matters is the language of lead and gunpowder." Blackwood merely smiled, having grown accustomed to the locals' gentle mockery of his educational mission. His next stop was the Whitaker Ranch, a modest but well-kept property on the outskirts of town. The arrangement to escort young Sarah to school had started at Catherine Whitaker's insistence. A widow raising a headstrong daughter needed all the help she could get. As he approached the white-painted fence, the sweet scent of Catherine's prized roses mixed with the ever-present desert sage. These roses were her small act of defiance against the harsh territory, much like Blackwood's insistence on proper grammar and literature in a town where most conversations revolved around silver yields and cattle prices. "Mr. Blackwood," Sarah called out from the porch, her books already clutched to her chest, golden hair catching the morning light. At 16, she was his brightest student, though her mother constantly worried about her rebellious streak. Sarah had inherited her father's curiosity and her mother's determination, a combination that often led her to question everything, from mathematical principles to society's expectations of young ladies. "Sarah, how many times must I remind you to address your teacher properly?" Catherine Whitaker emerged from the house, wiping her hands on her apron. Her stern expression couldn't quite hide the warmth in her eyes. "It's good morning, Mr. Blackwood, not shouting across the yard like you're calling the cattle." "It's quite all right, Mrs. Whitaker," Blackwood assured her, though he noted Sarah's playful smirk. "As long as proper respect is maintained in the classroom." He'd learned to pick his battles, and Sarah's enthusiasm for learning more than made up for her occasional lapses in formality. As they walked toward the schoolhouse, Sarah clutched her copy of Tales of the Frontier by Samuel Rivers, the latest addition to her growing collection of dime novels. "Have you read his latest, Mr. Blackwood? About the showdown at Devil's Canyon? The way he describes the gunfight between Marshall Wade and the Ghost Rider gang. It's like poetry with pistols." "I prefer more historically accurate literature," he replied. But seeing her enthusiasm fade, he added, "Though perhaps we could read a chapter after arithmetic today. There's something to be said for stories that capture the spirit of the frontier, even if they take certain liberties with the truth." Sarah beamed, already flipping through the pages to find her favorite passage. "Mr. Rivers really understands the West, doesn't he? The honor, the danger, the romance of it all." Blackwood glanced at his student, wondering not for the first time if her fascination with adventure stories might one day lead her into trouble. "The real West is more about hard work and perseverance than dramatic showdowns, Sarah. Something your mother understands well." But sometimes, she insisted, sometimes the stories come true. Sometimes ordinary people have to be extraordinary. Neither of them could have known that by sundown their quiet life would be shattered, and James Blackwood would be forced to discover if he possessed the courage that filled the pages of Sarah's beloved dime novels. The peaceful morning walk to school would soon become a memory of the last normal day before everything changed. The schoolhouse sat at the edge of Silverwater, a weathered wooden building that had seen better days. Inside, Blackwood's 17 students, ranging from 6 to 16 years old, sat in neat rows while morning sunlight streamed through the dusty windows. The lesson had begun with arithmetic, but true to his word, Blackwood had promised to end the day with a chapter from Sarah's beloved dime novel. "Now, who can tell me the solution to this problem?" Blackwood asked, chalk tapping against the board where he'd written a complex equation. Sarah's hand shot up immediately, but he purposely called on young Tommy Jenkins, who needed the practice. The boy was halfway through his stuttered answer when the first gunshot split the air. The sound of hooves thundering down the main street followed, accompanied by more gunfire and screams. Blackwood rushed to the window, his heart pounding against his ribs. A group of riders, at least 15 strong, were charging through Silverwater like a storm made flesh. Their leader, a tall figure on a midnight black stallion, wore a distinctive duster coat that seemed to ripple like a snake's scales in the wind. "Everyone away from the windows," Blackwood commanded, his seminary training lending authority to his voice. "Under your desks quickly now." The younger children scrambled to obey, but Sarah remained at her desk, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and fascination. "It's him," she whispered, clutching her dime novel. "The Rattler." Blackwood had heard the stories about Marcus Kane, the notorious outlaw known as the Rattler. They said he could draw his gun faster than any man alive, that his gang had robbed 20 banks in 3 territories, and that he'd never left a witness to identify him to the law. But those were just stories, like the ones in Sarah's books. Or so Blackwood had thought. Sheriff Hawkins's voice boomed from outside. "Kane! This town's under my protection?" The answering laugh was cold enough to freeze blood. "Protection?" The Rattler's voice carried clearly through the air. "Show me what that iron badge is worth, lawman." More shots rang out. Blackwood saw Sheriff Hawkins and his deputies taking cover behind water troughs and hitching posts, returning fire as best they could. The air filled with gun smoke and the acrid smell of burning powder. "Stay here," Blackwood ordered his students, moving toward the door. But as he reached for the handle, it burst open. 2 of Kane's men stood there, bandanas covering their faces. Well, the taller one drawled. "Looks like we found ourselves a schoolhouse." His eyes scanned the room until they landed on Sarah. The boss might be interested in this one. Before Blackwood could react, Sarah stood up. "Don't you dare touch these children," she declared, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. It was exactly the wrong moment for her characteristic bravery. "Sarah, no." Blackwood moved to intercept the bandits, but the shorter one backhanded him with a pistol, sending his spectacles flying. He crashed into the desk, ears ringing as the taller outlaw grabbed Sarah. Through blurred vision, Blackwood saw Sarah struggling as they dragged her out. He staggered to his feet, ignoring the blood trickling down his temple. Outside, the Rattler was watching the chaos his men had created, looking every bit like the demon from the wanted posters. Sarah was thrust toward him, her golden hair catching the sunlight one last time before she was pulled onto the leader's horse. "Anyone follows," the Rattler announced to the town, his voice carrying over the screams and gunfire. "And I'll send the girl back, piece by piece." He turned to Sheriff Hawkins, who was now disarmed and on his knees. "Consider this a message about protection." Blackwood ran into the street, his proper Philadelphia upbringing forgotten as he shouted, "Take me instead, she's just a child." The Rattler turned in his saddle, studying Blackwood with eyes that seemed to glow like a snake's in the dusty air. A teacher offering himself for his student? How noble. He smiled, revealing teeth filed to points. "But I think the daughter of the richest silver claim holder in the territory is worth more than a schoolmaster's life." With that, the Rattler spurred his horse and the gang thundered out of town as quickly as they had arrived, taking Sarah with them. The entire raid had lasted less than 10 minutes, but it had changed everything. In the aftermath, Blackwood found his broken spectacles in the schoolhouse dust. Sheriff Hawkins was being tended to by the town doctor, his right arm shattered by a bullet. Catherine Whitaker's screams echoed through the town when she heard the news, a sound that would haunt Blackwood's dreams for years to come. As the sun set over Silverwater, turning the sky the color of spilled blood, Blackwood made a decision that would alter not just his life, but the lives of everyone involved. He couldn't shoot, couldn't ride, couldn't track, but he had read every dime novel Sarah had shared with him. In those pages, he had learned of men who could do what he couldn't. Men like Ezra Cole, whose gun had brought law to lawless territories. If he couldn't save Sarah himself, he would find someone who could, even if it meant walking into the devil's own card game to make the deal. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The town hall was packed with angry voices and fearful whispers. Sunset had barely faded when Mayor Thaddeus Burke called an emergency meeting, though everyone knew it was too late for any real action. The air was thick with pipe smoke and desperation as Silverwater's citizens argued about what to do next. "We can't just leave her with those animals." Catherine Whitaker's voice cut through the chaos. She stood near the front, her normally immaculate appearance disheveled, eyes red from crying but burning with determination. "My daughter is out there somewhere." Dr. Mills, still wearing his blood-stained apron from tending to Sheriff Hawkins, cleared his throat. "The sheriff's arm is shattered. He won't be holding a gun for months, if ever again. His deputies—" The doctor trailed off. Everyone knew 2 deputies lay dead in the street, while the 3rd had fled during the shooting. "Then we form a posse," someone shouted from the back. Mayor Burke, his jowls quivering with nervous energy, shook his head. "The Rattlers gang is 20 strong, maybe more. They know the Badlands better than any of us. It would be suicide." Blackwood sat in the corner holding his repaired spectacles. The town's blacksmith had managed to solder them back together, but they sat slightly crooked on his nose. He listened as the debate raged on, his mind racing through everything he knew about the Rattler, from wanted, posters, and newspaper clippings. "What about the territorial marshals?" Catherine demanded. 3 days' ride minimum, the telegraph operator responded. "I sent word, but—" He didn't need to finish. Everyone knew what could happen to Sarah in 3 days. "There might be another way," Blackwood said quietly, but in the momentary lull, his voice carried. All eyes turned to him, some curious, others dismissive. He stood, straightening his dusty vest. "I've heard stories of a man, a former lawman named Ezra Cole." A murmur ran through the crowd. Even in Silverwater, they knew that name. "Ezra Cole is a killer," Mayor Burke scoffed. "They say he shot down the entire Thompson gang in Dodge City. 30 seconds later, 6 men died." "Exactly," Blackwood replied, his voice stronger now. "He's the kind of man we need." "And how do you propose to find this legendary gunfighter?" Someone called out mockingly. "Going to search every saloon between here and Kansas?" "Number." Blackwood turned to the crowd. 2 months ago, Sarah showed me a dime novel by Samuel Rivers. In it, he mentioned interviewing Cole in a town called Mercy's End, about 100 miles south of here. It's a start. "You?" The mayor laughed, and others joined in. "The school teacher who can't even ride a horse? You're going to track down Ezra Cole?" Catherine Whitaker stepped forward, silencing the laughter with a glare. "James," she said, using his first name for the first time, "you don't have to do this. You're not responsible for what happened." Blackwood met her gaze. "I was supposed to protect her, Mrs. Whitaker. I failed at that, but I won't fail at bringing her back." He turned to address the room. "You're right. I can't shoot, can't ride, can't track. But I can read, I can think, and I can offer whatever money I have to someone who can do what I can't." "Money?" Mayor Burke snorted. "On a teacher's salary?" "I have savings," Blackwood replied. "Everything I brought from Philadelphia, and—" He hesitated, then squared his shoulders. "And I have this." He pulled out a gold pocket watch, its surface gleaming in the lamplight. "It was my father's. A master craftsman in Philadelphia. It's worth more than most men make in a year." The room fell silent. Everyone knew what that watch meant to him. They'd seen him check it every morning as he walked to school, precise as a church bell. "Even if you find Cole," the doctor said, gentler now, "what makes you think he'll help? Men like that don't work for pocket watches and promises." "Because I'll offer him something else," Blackwood said. "Something I learned from Sarah's beloved dime novels. Men like Cole, they're not just killers, they're hunters. And the Rattler is the biggest prize in all the territories. The reward on his head would set a man up for life." The crowd muttered. He had a point. "I'll need a horse," Blackwood continued. "And directions to Mercy's End. The rest." He touched his crooked spectacles. "The rest I'll figure out along the way." Catherine Whitaker approached him, her face a mixture of hope and worry. From her pocket, she withdrew a small leather pouch. "My wedding ring," she said. "Add it to your offer. Bring my daughter home, James." The mayor tried one last time. "This is madness, Blackwood. You'll never make it to Mercy's End alive. The desert's full of bandits, renegades, and worse." "Then I'll die trying," Blackwood replied simply. "Because that's what teachers do, Mayor Burke. We don't give up on our students. Not ever." As the meeting dissolved into smaller arguments about passees and territorial marshals, Blackwood slipped out into the night. The desert wind carried the smell of sage and coming rain. Tomorrow, he would begin a journey that would either save Sarah or end with his body bleaching in the sun. But as he looked up at the stars, so different from Philadelphia's smoke-stained sky, he felt an unfamiliar emotion stirring in his chest. It wasn't courage, not exactly. It was something simpler. Certainty. For the first time since arriving in Silverwater, James Blackwood knew exactly what he had to do, even if it killed him. Dawn hadn't yet broken when Blackwood mounted the horse borrowed from the livery stable. The beast, a weather-beaten mare named Dusty, seemed as uncertain about him as he was about her. His total riding experience consisted of exactly 2 lessons hastily given by the stablemaster the previous evening, and every movement in the saddle felt like an invitation to disaster. "Remember," the stablemaster called out, "keep your heels down and let her do the thinking on rough terrain. She knows these trails better than any man." He paused, then added with a grimace, "Though I'd feel better if you at least knew how to hold a gun." Blackwood patted the ancient Colt revolver strapped awkwardly to his hip. Sheriff Hawkins had insisted he take it, though they both knew he was more likely to shoot himself than any attacker. The weapon felt foreign and heavy, like a sin weighing down his soul. "God helps those who help themselves," Blackwood muttered, recalling his seminary teachings, though he suspected God might appreciate it if his children learned to shoot straight before embarking on rescue missions. The first rays of sun were just touching Silverwater's rooftops when he heard running footsteps behind him. Catherine Whitaker approached, carrying a package wrapped in oilcloth. "Food for 3 days," she said, securing it to his saddle. "And this." She handed him a small daguerreotype of Sarah. In case you need to show people who you're looking for." Her voice cracked slightly, but her eyes remained dry. She'd done all her crying in the night. "I'll find her, Mrs. Whitaker, I promise." "Don't make promises you might not be able to keep, James." She squeezed his hand. "Just try to bring both of you back alive." The sun had cleared the horizon by the time Blackwood reached the edge of town. The desert stretched before him, a vast expanse of reds and browns beneath an endless blue sky. According to his borrowed map, Mercy's End lay 4 days' ride to the south, assuming he didn't get lost, killed, or thrown from his horse. The first few hours passed in relative peace, though every mile revealed new ways for an inexperienced rider to suffer. By mid-morning, muscles he didn't know he possessed were screaming in protest. He tried reciting Latin verbs to distract himself, but Dusty seemed to hit every rock in the trail during the conjugation of "to endure." Around noon, He spotted dust on the horizon. Riders approached fast, and Blackwood's heart began to race. He pulled Dusty behind a large boulder, trying to remember everything he'd read about desert ambushes in Sarah's novels. The riders drew closer, their hoofbeats like thunder on the hard-packed earth. 3 men appeared, their horses lathered with sweat. They wore dust-covered suits and carried bank bags. Not the Rattler's men, but definitely not law-abiding citizens either. Before Blackwood could decide what to do, Dusty sneezed. "Well, what do we have here?" The leader wheeled his horse around, leveling a shotgun at Blackwood's chest. "Looks like a gentleman who took a wrong turn. I'm just passing through," Blackwood managed, his voice steadier than his hands. "I have no quarrel with you." The second rider spat tobacco juice in the dust. "Mighty fine watch chain you got there, mister. Gold, if I ain't mistaken." "Canter." Blackwood's hand instinctively went to his father's watch. "It's not for sale." "Ain't looking to buy." The third man grinned, showing tobacco-stained teeth. "But we'll take it all the same, along with anything else you got worth taking." Time seemed to slow. Blackwood knew he should surrender his valuables. It was the sensible thing to do. But without the watch, how would he convince Ezra Cole to help him? Without it, Sarah was as good as dead. His hand moved toward the revolver, clumsy with fear. "Don't be stupid, friend," the leader warned. "That hog leg ain't even properly holstered. You'll be dead before you clear leather." "Probably shoot his own foot," the second man laughed. Blackwood's fingers touched the gun's grip. At that moment, he remembered something from Sarah's beloved dime novels. Sometimes the hero won not by being the fastest, but by being the most unexpected. "Gentlemen," he said, pushing his spectacles up with his free hand. "I don't suppose any of you attended university?" The non sequitur gave them pause. "What?" "Because if you had," Blackwood continued, his voice taking on the firm tone he used with unruly students, "you might have studied chemistry." With his free hand, he reached into his saddlebag. "And you might know what happens when you mix the contents of a photographer's darkroom with common black powder." He withdrew a small glass bottle he'd borrowed from the town photographer. In the bright sunlight, the clear liquid inside sparkled innocently. "1 drop," he said, holding it precariously. "And the explosion would take us all straight to heaven, or the other place." His hand shook convincingly. "I may not be good with a gun, but I assure you I'm excellent at chemistry." The bandits exchanged uncertain looks. The threat of a gun was something they understood, but mysterious chemicals from a clearly educated man? That was outside their experience. "Ain't worth it," the leader decided. "Let's ride. Probably just glass cleaner, but no sense risking our necks over one fancy watch." They wheeled their horses and galloped away, leaving Blackwood trembling in their dust. Once they were gone, he looked at the bottle and laughed shakily. It was indeed glass cleaner. "Sometimes," he told Dusty, patting her neck, "the best lessons are the ones we teach ourselves." The horse snorted, seemingly unimpressed by his improvised chemistry lecture. By sunset, his muscles had moved beyond pain into a sort of numb acceptance. He made camp in the shelter of a rock formation, grateful for the basic survival lessons the stablemaster had insisted on teaching him. As he chewed on jerky and stale bread, Blackwood studied Sarah's photograph by firelight. "Hold on," he whispered to the image. "Help is coming, even if I have to bluff my way across the entire territory to find it." Mercy's End didn't live up to its name. The town sprawled across a dusty valley like a pile of sun-bleached bones, more alive than dead despite its morbid moniker. Blackwood arrived on the afternoon of the 4th day, his clothes coated in dust and his body aching in places he hadn't known existed. Dusty, the mare who had proven more reliable than any horse had a right to be, plodded wearily down the main street. Unlike the orderly grid of Silverwater, Mercy's End had grown like a wild thing, buildings sprouting wherever they pleased. Saloons outnumbered churches 3 to 1, and every other establishment seemed to be either a gambling hall or a house of ill repute. The air smelled of smoke, unwashed bodies, and something else. Desperation, perhaps, or opportunity gone sour. "Pardon me," Blackwood called out to a man sweeping the boardwalk in front of a general store. "I'm looking for Ezra Cole." The man stopped sweeping, squinting up at him. "Ain't we all?" He spat a stream of tobacco juice that barely missed Dusty's hooves. "Cole comes and goes like bad weather. Ain't seen him in weeks." Blackwood's heart sank. He'd gambled everything on finding Cole here, following the lead from Sarah's dime novel. As if sensing his despair, the man leaned on his broom. "Though if you're really keen on dying," he added, "try the Broken Spur. Cole drinks there when he's in town. The owner might know something." The Broken Spur turned out to be the largest saloon in Mercy's End, a 2-story affair with actual glass windows, a sign of prosperity in these parts. Blackwood dismounted carefully, his legs trembling from days in the saddle. He tied Dusty to the hitching post, checking his father's watch for the 100th time. Still there, still ticking, still his only real hope of convincing Cole to help. Inside, the saloon was surprisingly clean, though the air was thick with pipe smoke. A woman in a fine dress was playing something melancholy on a piano that had seen better days. At the bar, a tall figure in black stood polishing glasses with suspicious intensity. "Welcome to the Broken Spur," the barman said without looking up. "What's your poison?" "Information," Blackwood replied, sliding onto a bar stool and trying not to wince at his saddle-sore muscles. "About Ezra Cole." The polishing stopped. The barman looked up, revealing a face that seemed carved from weathered oak. A scar ran from his left temple to his jaw, pulling his mouth into a permanent half-smile. "Lots of men are looking for Cole," he said carefully. "Most of them want to kill him or hire him. Neither tends to end well. I need to hire him." Blackwood withdrew his father's watch, letting it catch the light. "I can pay." The barman's eyes narrowed at the watch. "Pretty piece, but Cole doesn't work for trinkets, no matter how fine." "Then what about the Rattler?" Blackwood asked, lowering his voice. "Would he work for the biggest bounty in the territories?" A silence fell over the nearby tables. The piano player hit a wrong note. "Mister," the barman said, leaning forward. "You don't want to say that name too loud in here. Man like the Rattler, he's got ears everywhere." "He has something I need to get back," Blackwood insisted. "Something precious." "Let me guess." A new voice drew from behind him. "The girl from Silverwater?" Blackwood turned to find a man seated alone in a shadowy corner. He hadn't noticed him before, which seemed impossible given the man's presence. He wore a gray duster and a gun belt that had been oiled so often it was nearly black. His face was hidden beneath the brim of a weathered hat. "News travels fast," Blackwood said. "Bad news travels the fastest." The man gestured to the empty chair across from him. "Have a seat, schoolmaster. Let's talk about your proposition." Blackwood's heart raced. "You're Ezra Cole?" "Depends who's asking." The man finally looked up, revealing eyes the color of winter sky. "Right now, I'm just a man having a drink, listening to a fellow who's either very brave or very foolish." Blackwood sat, placing the watch on the table between them. "I'm both, Mr. Cole. And I'm desperate. Clearly." Cole picked up the watch, examining it with expert eyes. "Fine piece. Philadelphia-made, if I'm not mistaken. Like you. How did you—" "Your accent. Your clothes, the way you sit a horse like it's going to bite you." Cole's lips twitched. "You're about as Western as a French opera." "Does that matter?" "It might." Cole set the watch down. "Tell me why you're really here, schoolmaster. And make it good. I've heard a lot of stories in this saloon, but I've got a feeling yours might be interesting." Blackwood took a deep breath. Everything, Sarah's life, his mission, his very survival, depended on the next few minutes. He had to make this man understand, had to convince him that this wasn't just another job. And so, as the afternoon sun slanted through the dusty windows of the Broken Spur, James Blackwood began to tell his story to the deadliest gunman in the territories, praying that somewhere in his words Ezra Cole would find a reason to help. As Blackwood finished recounting the events in Silverwater, Cole remained silent, studying him with those winter-gray eyes. The saloon had grown quieter, as if the other patrons could sense the weight of the moment. Even the piano player had shifted to softer melodies. "Let me be sure I understand," Cole finally said, his voice low and measured. "You rode 4 days across territory you don't know, carrying a fortune in gold and no real way to defend it, to ask a man you've never met to help you take on the most dangerous outlaw in the West? All for one student? Yes?" Blackwood met his gaze steadily. "And you think offering me this watch and the Rattler's bounty will be enough?" "No," Blackwood replied, surprising Cole. "I think offering you a chance to do something that matters will be enough. The watch and bounty are just incentives." Cole's laugh was sudden and sharp as a gunshot. "Something that matters? Mister, I've killed 37 men. Each one mattered to somebody. But how many did you save?" The question hung in the air like gunsmoke. Cole's face hardened. "Careful, schoolmaster. You're treading dangerous ground." "I've read about you," Blackwood pressed on, knowing he was risking everything but unable to stop. "Not just in dime novels, in newspaper accounts, Sheriff Hawkins's records. You were a lawman once, a good one. The kind who protected people, not just killed bad men." "That was a long time ago." "Was it? The Thompson gang in Dodge City? You didn't just kill them. You killed them because they were holding a family hostage. You saved those people." Cole's hand moved slightly closer to his gun. "You seem to know a lot about me." "I'm a teacher," Blackwood said simply. "Research is what we do, and everything I've learned tells me you're not just a killer for hire. You're a man who once stood for something. And what makes you think I want to stand for anything now?" Blackwood reached into his coat and withdrew Sarah's daguerreotype, placing it beside the watch. "Because of her. Sarah Whitaker. 16 years old. Brightest student I've ever taught. She believes in all those stories about heroes and justice, the same stories that mention your name." Cole picked up the photograph, his expression unreadable. "Pretty girl. Looks like her mother. You know Catherine Whitaker? Knew her husband. He was a good man. Didn't deserve what happened in that mine collapse." Cole set the photograph down carefully. "The girl reads dime novels, you say?" "Every one she can get her hands on, especially Samuel Rivers' books." Something flickered in Cole's eyes. "Rivers, that old fraud. You know him?" "Know him? Half the stories he writes about me are pure fantasy. Man's never been within 100 miles of most of the places he claims to have seen me." Cole paused, then added more quietly, "Though he got at the Thompson gang story right. Mostly." A commotion at the saloon entrance drew their attention. 3 rough-looking men had entered, trail dust still clinging to their clothes. They headed straight for the bar. "Trouble?" Blackwood asked, noting how Cole's posture had subtly shifted. "Maybe. Men like that, riding hard into town mid-afternoon. They're either running from something or looking for someone." Cole's voice dropped lower. "And given how many people know you're looking for me, I'm guessing they're not here for the whiskey." The barman was speaking with the newcomers, his face carefully blank. One of them slapped a piece of paper on the bar, a sketch of Blackwood, crude but recognizable. "The Rattler's men," Blackwood whispered, his mouth gone dry. "They must have been tracking me, probably since Silverwater," Cole agreed. "You're not exactly hard to follow. The question is, did they let you lead them to me on purpose?" I point. "I didn't think—" "No, you didn't." Cole's voice was sharp, but not unkind. "First lesson of the West, schoolmaster. Everyone's playing a deeper game than you think." He stood slowly, his duster falling open to reveal his gun belt. "Second lesson. Sometimes the best play is the one nobody expects." Before Blackwood could ask what he meant, Cole strode to the bar, leaving him alone at the table. The gunman moved with a predator's grace, each step precisely measured. "Gentlemen," Cole announced, his voice carrying through the now silent saloon. "I hear you're looking for a schoolteacher." The three men turned, hands drifting toward their guns. The leader, a scarred man with a red bandana, squinted at Cole. "This ain't your business, mister." "Oh, but it is." Cole smiled, though it didn't reach his eyes. "See, that schoolteacher came here looking to hire me, and I just decided to take the job." The declaration hung in the air like a death sentence. Even the piano player had stopped, her hands frozen above the keys. "You're Cole?" Red Bandana's voice wavered slightly. "The books say you're taller." "The books say a lot of things." Cole's hands were nowhere near his guns, which somehow made him even more dangerous. "Now, you boys, have a choice. Ride out now. Tell your boss what you found, or stay and find out if the stories about me are true." The moment stretched like pulled taffy. Blackwood held his breath, aware that he was witnessing something few men lived to tell about. Ezra Cole, not just the killer, but the legend. Finally, Red Bandana nodded. "We'll tell him." He turned to Blackwood, his face hard. "But you remember something, teacher. The Rattler don't forget. And now, he's got 2 reasons to kill you." After they left, Cole returned to the table. He picked up the watch and photograph, studying them one last time before handing them back to Blackwood. "Well, schoolmaster," he said, "looks like you got your wish. But understand something. This won't be like your dime novels. It'll be harder, bloodier, and a lot less heroic." He paused. "Still want to save the girl?" Blackwood pocketed his father's watch, his hand steadier than he expected. "Yes. Then we'll need help. The kind of help that doesn't come cheap or easy." Cole stood. "Hope you're ready for a longer ride, schoolmaster. We've got some very dangerous people to visit." Dawn found them riding east, away from Mercy's End. Cole had insisted they leave before first light, knowing the Rattler's men would return with reinforcements. Blackwood, still sore but somewhat more comfortable in the saddle, tried to match his companion's easy rhythm on horseback. "First rule of tracking outlaws," Cole said, breaking a 2-hour silence, "is don't let them track you. We're heading to Devil's Gorge, but not in a straight line." He gestured at the rocky terrain ahead. "Ground's hard here. Won't hold tracks. Makes it harder for them to follow." Devil's Gorge. Blackwood had read about the place in Sarah's novels. "Isn't that where I supposedly gunned down the entire Carson gang single-handed?" Cole's mouth twisted. "Another one of River's tall tales. Truth is, I only killed 3 of them. The rest fell to their own stupidity and bad timing." He paused, studying the horizon. "But the man we're looking for? He was there. Saw the whole thing. Who is he? Isaac Powder Powell. Best demolitions man in the territories. Man can turn a handful of mining supplies into something that'll level a mountain." Cole adjusted his hat against the rising sun. "Also happens to be completely insane." "Insane?" Blackwood's voice cracked. "Is that wise? Wise? Number necessary?" "Yes, the Rattler's hideout is in an old silver mine. Heavily fortified. We'll need Powell's expertise to get inside." Cole glanced at him. "Unless you'd prefer to walk in the front door." Blackwood remembered the Rattler's snake-like eyes and filed teeth. Point taken. They rode in silence for another hour before Cole raised his hand, signaling a stop. "Water the horses, then I need to teach you something." Once they'd seen their mounts, Cole led Blackwood to a relatively flat area, dotted with empty bottles he'd collected from his saddlebags. "Time to learn about that gun you're carrying." "Mr. Cole, I've never—" "Exactly. And that ends now." Cole positioned Blackwood in front of the makeshift targets. "You're no good to anyone if you can't defend yourself. Besides," he added with a grim smile, "shooting's just applied mathematics. Should be right up your alley, schoolmaster." What followed was the most intense lesson of Blackwood's life. Cole was a demanding teacher, correcting his stance, grip, and breathing with drill sergeant precision. After an hour, Blackwood's arms ached, but he'd managed to hit 3 bottles out of 20. Not great, Cole admitted, but better than nothing. We'll practice every time we stop. He began collecting the unbroken bottles. Tell me something. Why'd you really come looking for me? Blackwood lowered the gun, considering. Because you were the only name that kept coming up in both fact and fiction. The dime novels made you sound impossible, but the newspaper accounts and and they made you sound human. Human? Cole laughed softly. That's not usually what people say about me. The Thompson gang hostages, Blackwood pressed. The paper said you got shot making sure the children got out first. A pure killer wouldn't have done that. Cole's face hardened. Maybe I just wanted a clear shot at the gang. Maybe, but I don't believe that's who you are. And who am I, schoolmaster? A man who spent so long playing the villain in other people's stories. He's forgotten he could be something else. Cole stared at him for a long moment, then turned away. Mount up. We're burning daylight. They reached Devil's Gorge by late afternoon. The place lived up to its name, a jagged tear in the earth that seemed to descend straight to hell. At the bottom, barely visible, sat a ramshackle collection of buildings that might generously be called a town. Powell's down there, Cole said, studying the gorge through a battered spyglass. Assuming he hasn't blown himself up since I last saw him. How do we reach him? Carefully. Man's paranoid about visitors. Set traps. Cole handed him the spyglass. See that building with the metal roof? That's his workshop. Getting there is going to be interesting. As if to emphasize his point, a distant explosion echoed up from the gorge, followed by a plume of multicolored smoke. What was that? Blackwood asked, alarmed. That, Cole replied, with something almost like amusement, was Powell saying hello. He knows we're here. They led their horses down a treacherous switchback trail, Cole pointing out nearly invisible tripwires and pressure plates that would trigger Powell's security measures. Halfway down, they heard another explosion, closer this time. Is he shooting at us? Number. Cole seemed unnaturally calm. If Powell was shooting at us, we'd be dead. This is his way of showing off. Man's got a flair for the dramatic. They reached the bottom of the gorge just as the sun disappeared behind the rim, plunging everything into purple shadow. The buildings looked even more decrepit up close, many sporting scorch marks and hastily patched holes. Stay close, Cole warned as they approached Powell's workshop. Step exactly where I step, and whatever you do, don't touch anything. The workshop door opened before they reached it. In the doorway stood a small man with wild gray hair and a beard that looked like it had been trimmed with dynamite. His clothes were covered in mysterious stains, and his eyes had the particular gleam of someone who'd seen beyond the veil of sanity and decided he preferred the view from the other side. Ezra Cole, Powell announced, his voice surprisingly cultured. Still pretending to be the hero of your own story? Hello, Isaac. Cole's hand stayed carefully away from his gun. Been a while. 3 years, 4 months, and 17 days. Powell's eyes fixed on Blackwood. And you brought a librarian. How novel. He giggled at his own joke. Come to borrow a book, have you? Or perhaps... His expression turned crafty. You're here about the Rattler? News travels fast, Blackwood said. News? No. Chemistry travels fast, physics travels faster, news. Powell waved a powder-stained hand dismissively. News is just gossip with a deadline, but the Rattler, now there's a problem worth solving, mathematically speaking. We need your help, Isaac, Cole said quietly. Help? Like in Dodge City? Powell's eyes narrowed. That help cost me 3 fingers and my peaceful retirement. This is different, Blackwood interjected. This is about saving an innocent girl. Innocent? Powell laughed. Out here. Tell me, librarian, what's the explosive force of innocence? Can it breach stone walls, shatter iron gates? His expression turned serious. No. Innocence burns too clean. We need something darker. Something with a proper bite. He disappeared into his workshop, still muttering. Cole and Blackwood exchanged glances. After a moment, Powell's voice drifted out. "Well? Are you coming in? The coffee's hot, the dynamite's fresh, and I have so many new toys to show you." "After you, schoolmaster," Cole said with a slight smile. "Just remember, don't touch anything. And if he offers you something to drink, politely decline. Man thinks nitroglycerin makes an excellent cocktail mixer." Powell's workshop was a marvel of organized chaos. Every surface held bottles, jars, and mysterious devices, all meticulously labeled in cramped handwriting. The air smelled of sulfur, coffee, and something sweet that made Blackwood's nose tingle alarmingly. Maps and formulae covered the walls, connected by red strings that seemed to follow some logic only Powell understood. "Don't mind the hissing sounds," Powell said, shuffling through the clutter. "That's just the sodium experiments. Probably won't explode." "Probably. Ew." He cackled, then turned suddenly serious. "Now about the Rattler's hideout. Silver mine, yes. Old Spanish excavation." "That's our intelligence," Cole confirmed, standing carefully still. He'd positioned himself between Blackwood and a shelf of colorful liquids that bubbled ominously. "Ah, but which one?" Powell pulled down a massive map, yellowed with age. "There are 17 abandoned Spanish silver mines in the territory. Each one a potential fortress. Each one." He stabbed the map with a powder-stained finger. "A potential tomb." "We can narrow it down," Blackwood offered. The Rattler's men rode south from Silverwater, then east toward the Diablo Mountains. "Clever boy." Powell's eyes lit up. Yes. That eliminates 12 possibilities, but still leaves 5. He began pacing, muttering calculations under his breath. "Factor in water access, defensible positions, hidden approaches. Yes. No." He slammed his fist on a table, making various containers rattle dangerously. "We need more data." "Isaac," Cole said quietly, "we don't have time for calculations. The girl—" "Time! Ha!" Powell spun to face them. "Time is just another variable, Ezra. Like pressure, heat, velocity." He trailed off, staring at something only he could see. "The girl. Yes. Tell me about her." Blackwood described Sarah, her love of books, her spirit. As he spoke, Powell's expressions shifted rapidly. Interest, calculation, something almost like concern. 16, you say? Same age as my Rebecca was when the fever took her. Powell's voice grew distant. She loved books too, chemistry mainly. Would have made a fine scientist. He shook himself. "The Rattler's holding her in La Serpiente." "You're sure?" Cole asked. "Of course I'm sure," Powell snapped. "It's the only mine that fits all parameters. Deep enough for protection, close to water, multiple escape routes, and—" He grinned manically. "Most importantly, highly unstable. One good blast in the right place could bring down the whole mountain." "We're trying to save Sarah, not bury her," Blackwood reminded him. Details. Powell waved dismissively. "Any fool can make things explode. The art is in making them explode exactly how and when you want." He began gathering materials, muttering a shopping list that made Blackwood increasingly nervous. Dynamite, of course. Nitroglycerin for precision work. Some of my special compound for the outer defenses. "Isaac," Cole interrupted. "Are you in?" Powell stopped, looking at them with sudden clarity. "You know what happened last time we worked together, Ezra. 3 fingers and most of my sanity. You were insane long before Dodge City, old friend." True. Powell smiled. "But afterward, I became professionally insane. Much more profitable." He studied Blackwood. "A teacher, a gunman, and a madman. Quite the rescue party. But we'll need more. Much more." "I have someone in mind," Cole said. "Morning Star." Powell's eyes widened. "The Navajo tracker? I thought he'd sworn a blood oath to kill you." "He did, but he also owes me a life debt. Figure they cancel each other out. Fascinating equation. Powell turned to Blackwood. Tell me, teacher, do they teach advanced probability in your school? Because I'd love to calculate our odds of survival. I prefer not to think about it, Blackwood admitted. Wise man, very wise. Powell laughed. Very well, I'm in, but on one condition. He fixed Blackwood with an unnervingly steady gaze. When we get the girl back, you make sure she gets a proper education, chemistry specifically. The world needs more scientists, fewer gunslingers. No offense, Ezra. None taken. Excellent. Powell clapped his hands. Now, help me pack, and be careful with that red box. It's filled with something I invented last week. Haven't named it yet, but it makes dynamite look like a damp firecracker. They spent the next hour carefully, very carefully, loading Powell's supplies into specially padded saddlebags. The inventor insisted on bringing what seemed like enough explosives to start a small war, along with mysterious devices he swore would be essential. The Rattler's men will be watching the trails, Cole said as they prepared to leave. We'll need to be clever about this. Clever? Powell's eyes gleamed. I have just the thing. A little invention I've been saving for a special occasion. He produced what looked like a normal stick of dynamite, except for its unusual blue color. This beauty creates a smokescreen that'll cover half a mountain. Non-toxic, mostly. Mostly? Blackwood asked. Well, it might turn your hair green for a few days. But that's chemistry for you. Always a price to pay for progress. As they led their horses back up the treacherous trail, Powell regaled them with stories of his various experiments, each more terrifying than the last. Blackwood found himself simultaneously fascinated and disturbed by the man's brilliant, fractured mind. One last thing, Powell called as they reached the rim of the gorge. If anyone asks, I'm officially dead, have been for years. Makes the tax situation much simpler. Cole nodded as if this was perfectly reasonable. Any other conditions? Just one. Powell's face turned serious again. When this is over, when the girl is safe. I want 10 minutes alone with the Rattler. There's an experiment I've been dying to try. The gleam in his eyes made Blackwood shudder. Perhaps there were worse things in this world than gunslingers after all. The Apache territories stretched before them like a painted nightmare, all red rocks and twisted shadows. They'd been riding for 2 days, following Cole's memory of where Morningstar might be found. Powell's presence had complicated their journey. Every few hours he'd insist on stopping to collect minerals or plants for his experiments, muttering about chemical compositions and explosive yields. Remind me again, Blackwood said, wiping sweat from his brow, why we need a tracker who wants to kill you. Because, Cole replied, scanning the horizon, Morningstar is the best there is. Man can read tracks 3 days old and tell you what the rider had for breakfast. Besides, he added with a grim smile, the life debt takes precedence over the blood oath. Probably. Fascinating cultural dynamics. Powell chimed in from behind them where he was crushing some unfortunate plant between his fingers. Did you know the statistical probability of surviving a blood oath is actually higher than... Quiet! Cole raised his hand sharply. The others fell silent, following his gaze to a rocky outcropping ahead. We're being watched. Blackwood saw nothing but shadows and stone, but he'd learned to trust Cole's instincts. Powell, surprisingly, had also turned serious, his hands moving slowly toward one of his mysterious devices. Morningstar, Cole called out in a clear voice. I know you're there. We need to talk. The silence stretched for several heartbeats. Then, like a shadow coming to life, a figure emerged from between the rocks. The man moved with liquid grace, his weathered face painted with intricate designs that seemed to shift in the harsh sunlight. A Winchester rifle rested easily in his hands, not quite pointed at them. Ezra Cole. Morningstar's voice was soft, but carried clearly. You have courage coming here. Or perhaps merely foolishness. Heard that a lot lately, Cole replied dryly. He kept his hands carefully away from his guns. We need your help. We? Morningstar's dark eyes moved to Blackwood and Powell. A scholar, And a madman. Strange companions, even for you. How did you? Blackwood began. Your hands have ink stains, not calluses. And him. Morningstar nodded toward Powell, his eyes dancing with ghost fire. I know his kind. He turned back to Cole. Why have you come? Cole explained the situation, Sarah's kidnapping, the Rattler's involvement, their plan to breach La Serpiente mine. As he spoke, Morningstar's expression remained impassive, but his grip on the rifle tightened slightly at the mention of the Rattler. The Snake Man, he said, when Cole finished. His gang raided 3 Apache villages last summer, took our horses, killed our warriors. Eyes narrowed. The elders forbade pursuit, said he was protected by dark spirits. Not spirits, Powell interjected. Just well-placed dynamite and good tactical positions, though I must say his use of geographic advantages is quite impressive from an engineering perspective. Isaac, Cole warned. Right. Shutting up now. Morningstar studied them each in turn, his gaze lingering longest on Blackwood. You, teacher? Why do you risk your life for one student? Blackwood met his eyes steadily. Because she believes in heroes, in justice, in all the things this territory seems to have forgotten. Something flickered in Morningstar's expression. You wish to preserve her faith, even though you yourself are not sure you believe anymore. I point. Blackwood hesitated. I believe in trying. Morningstar was silent for a long moment. Then, in one fluid motion, he slung his rifle over his shoulder. The blood oath demands I kill Ezra Cole. The life debt demands I help him, an interesting problem. If it helps, Powell offered cheerfully, I've brought enough explosives to solve most ethical dilemmas. To everyone's surprise, Morningstar laughed, a short, sharp sound like stones falling. The madman speaks the truth. Sometimes the simplest solution is the best. He stepped closer, moving like water over rocks. I will help you. The blood oath can wait until the girl is safe. Appreciated, Cole said dryly. But, Morningstar raised a finger, I have conditions. First, when we find the Rattler, his horses must be returned to my people. Second, his eyes locked onto Cole. After this is done, you and I will settle our debt, one way or another. Agreed. Excellent. Powell clapped his hands, making everyone jump. Now that the death threats are settled, perhaps we could discuss strategy? I have some fascinating ideas about using the local geology to our advantage. Did you know that certain rock formations, when subjected to the right combination of pressure and heat? Isaac, Cole interrupted. Maybe save the geology lesson for camp? Oh, very well. But I must say, the acoustic properties of these canyons would make for some spectacular explosions. As they made camp that evening, Blackwood watched their unlikely group with a mixture of hope and trepidation. A gunslinger haunted by his past, a madman who saw beauty in destruction, a tracker balancing honor and vengeance, and himself, a school teacher who'd never imagined being part of such a company. Something troubles you, Morningstar said, settling beside him at the fire. Just wondering what Sarah would make of all this. Real heroes are. More complicated than in her books. Ah. Morningstar nodded. The stories we tell children are simple. The ones we live are not. But perhaps, he added softly, that is why they need both. In the gathering darkness, Powell was arranging some of his mysterious compounds while Cole cleaned his guns with methodical precision. Tomorrow they will begin planning in earnest. The Rattler's days of freedom were numbered, assuming, of course, they all survived long enough to find him. Dawn broke over their camp with the sound of Powell testing what he called a minor explosive device, though minor in Powell's vocabulary seemed to mean anything that didn't level mountains. The blast sent a flock of startled ravens into the sky, their harsh cries echoing off the canyon walls. Was that really necessary? Cole asked, not looking up from the crude map he was drawing in the dirt. Absolutely, Powell beamed. I had to test the local mineral composition. Fascinating stuff. The resonance patterns suggest... Movement, Morningstar cut in, appearing silently beside them. 3 riders, coming fast. Everyone tensed, but Morningstar raised a hand. Not the Rattler's men. Different rhythm. These riders push their horses too hard. Desperate. Within minutes, they heard the approaching hoofbeats. Cole and Morningstar melted into the rocks, while Powell casually placed what looked like a normal canteen near the camp's edge. Blackwood, following Cole's earlier instructions, remained by the fire, trying to appear harmless. The riders burst into view, 2 men and a woman, their clothes trail-worn and dusty. The woman's dress was finer than her companion's, though now torn and stained. They pulled up short at seeing the camp. "Water," the woman gasped. "Please, we've been riding all night." Blackwood stood slowly. "Of course, but first, who are you?" "Florence Fletcher," she replied, her accent cultured despite her disheveled appearance. "These are my associates. We're theater performers. Had a bit of trouble in our last town." "Trouble?" Blackwood noticed Cole shifting slightly in the rocks, his gun trained on the newcomers. "The Rattler's men," the second man spat. "Tried to recruit us, forcefully." That got everyone's attention. Powell's canteen forgotten, Cole and Morningstar emerged from hiding, weapons ready. The travelers tensed but seemed more relieved than alarmed. "You're running from the Rattler?" Cole asked. "Tell us everything." Over the next hour, their story emerged. Florence Fletcher was indeed an actress, but also something more. A spy who used her performances as cover to gather information for various law enforcement agencies. Her companions, Wesley Tucker and Thomas Burke, were fellow performers who helped maintain her cover. "We were putting on shows in mining camps," Florence explained, accepting a cup of Powell's surprisingly normal coffee. "Gathering information about the Rattler's operations. We'd heard rumors about his main hideout, but needed confirmation." "La Serpiente," Cole said. It wasn't a question. Florence's eyes narrowed. "You know about it?" "We're planning to pay it a visit," Powell said cheerfully. "Going to be quite a show. Explosions, gunfire, possibly some improvised chemistry." "Isaac," Cole warned. "What? Just setting the scene?" Florence studied their group with new interest. "A gunfighter, a demolitions expert, an Apache tracker, and..." She paused at Blackwood. "A school teacher? Fascinating combination." "We're here for the girl," Morningstar said quietly. "The one the Rattler took from Silverwater." "Sarah Whitaker?" Florence sat up straighter. "We saw her 3 days ago." Blackwood's heart jumped. "Is she alive? Is she hurt?" "She's alive," Florence assured him, "and causing the Rattler no end of trouble from what I heard. Girl's got spirit, keeps quoting dime novels at him, telling him he's not living up to the proper standards of Western villainy." Despite the situation, Blackwood couldn't help but smile. It was such a Sarah thing to do. "The mine's heavily guarded," Wesley added, demonstrating with some pebbles. "Main entrance here, hidden exit through an old ventilation shaft here. At least 30 men rotating shifts. But the interesting part? They're preparing for something big, moving in supplies, ammunition." "A major raid," Morningstar guessed. "The Snake Man grows bold." "More than that," Thomas said. "From what we overheard, he's planning to hit 3 towns at once. Silverwater's on the list." The news hit Blackwood like a physical blow. Not just Sarah, but his whole town was in danger. Cole must have read his expression. "Changes nothing," the gunman said firmly. "We stick to the plan. Get the girl, deal with the Rattler." "Actually," Florence interjected, "it changes everything, because I can help." She reached into her boot and withdrew a folded paper. "Complete layout of La Serpiente. Guard rotations, weak points, everything. I was supposed to get this to the territorial marshals, but..." She smiled grimly. "I think you'll make better use of it." Powell snatched the paper, his eyes gleaming as he studied it. "Oh, yes. Yes. Look here, Ezra. The main support pillars are exactly where I predicted. One good blast and... We're not bringing down the mountain, Isaac. No, of course not. But if we time it right, create a distraction here," he pointed excitedly, "while your Apache friend comes in through the ventilation shaft." As they bent over the map, planning and arguing, Blackwood found himself standing slightly apart, watching this strange gathering of outcasts and professionals. Each had their own reasons for being here, their own scores to settle. But somehow, improbably, they were coming together for a single purpose. Quite a collection of characters, isn't it? Florence had joined him quietly, almost like something out of a dime novel. Sarah would love it, Blackwood agreed. If she weren't. He couldn't finish. "We'll get her back," Florence said firmly. "The Rattler's clever, but he's never faced anything quite like this group." She paused, then added with a theatrical smile, "Besides, every good story needs a proper finale. And I, for one, intend to make this one memorable." La Serpiente rose before them like a demon's fortress, its entrance carved into the mountainside beneath a natural overhang that resembled a snake's hood. The setting sun painted the rocks blood red, casting long shadows that seemed to writhe and twist in the dying light. From their vantage point half a mile away, they could see the Rattler's men patrolling the approaches, rifles glinting. 37 guards, Morningstar reported, lowering his spyglass. "More inside. They are nervous. The Snake Man knows we are coming." Their plan unfolded like a deadly choreographed dance. Florence and her performers approached the main entrance, spinning tales of lost travelers. Powell's explosives painted the sky with impossible colors, drawing guards away from their posts. Through the chaos, Morningstar vanished into the shadows, silent as death itself. Blackwood and Cole slipped through Powell's smokescreen, the strange chemicals making their eyes water. Inside, La Serpiente was a maze of tunnels and chambers carved by Spanish miners generations ago. They encountered resistance, quick, brutal exchanges that ended with Cole's gun smoking and more of the Rattler's men lying still. A woman's scream echoed through the tunnels, but not from fear. It was a cry of pure rage, followed by the sound of something heavy falling. "Sarah," Blackwood breathed, recognizing her voice. They rounded a corner to find two of the Rattler's men sprawled unconscious outside a heavy door. Sarah Whitaker stood over them, wielding a wooden stool like a club, her dress torn but her spirit clearly unbroken. "Mr. Blackwood?" She stared at them in disbelief. "You came? Like in the novels?" Before he could answer, slow applause echoed through the tunnel. Marcus Kane, the Rattler himself, emerged from the shadows, flanked by his remaining men. His filed teeth gleamed in the lantern light as he smiled. "Quite the performance," the Rattler said. "But did you really think I wouldn't be ready? That I wouldn't recognize a diversion when I saw one?" He drew his gun with liquid grace, though I admit the colored smoke was a nice touch. As if in answer, another explosion rocked the mine. Closer this time, more violent. Dust and rocks showered down as Powell's voice echoed through the tunnels. "Fire in the hole!" The blast that followed wasn't like the others. The very mountain seemed to groan as support beams cracked. The Rattler's men stumbled, several dropping their weapons as they tried to keep their footing. In that chaos, Morningstar appeared like a spirit of vengeance, his knife finding two targets before anyone could react. Cole's guns roared, the sound deafening in the confined space. The Rattler dove for cover, his return shot grazing Cole's shoulder. "Sarah, run!" Blackwood shouted, pushing her toward the exit. But Sarah Whitaker, who had grown up on tales of heroes and justice, had other ideas. "The support beam!" she cried, pointing to a wooden beam that Powell's blast had weakened. "Just like in the mine siege of '68. Blackwood understood. All those dime novels, all those improbable stories. Sometimes life did imitate art. He aimed his borrowed revolver, remembering Cole's lessons about breathing and target acquisition. The Rattler emerged from cover, his gun aimed at Cole's heart. "Drop them," he ordered. Or, Blackwood fired. His shot hit the weakened beam just as another of Powell's explosions shook the tunnel. With a sound like thunder, the beam gave way, bringing down a cascade of rock and dirt. The Rattler leaped back, directly into Cole's line of fire. 2 shots rang out as one. The Rattler and Cole both fired, both hit. Cole staggered but stayed standing. The Rattler fell, a look of genuine surprise on his face as his blood stained the tunnel floor. "That's not," he gasped, "not how the story's supposed to end." "Sometimes," Sarah said, quoting from one of her beloved novels, "the ending writes itself." The mine was collapsing in earnest now. They ran through falling rocks and Powell's multicolored smoke supporting Cole between them. Outside, Morningstar had already secured horses, while Florence's group held off the remaining gang members with an impressive display of knife-throwing and theatrical distraction. "Timing!" Powell shouted gleefully as they emerged. "It's all about timing." He held up a final detonator. "And now for the grand finale." The explosion that followed would be talked about for years. La Serpiente's entrance collapsed in a symphony of noise and colored fire, sealing the Rattler's legacy forever in his tomb of stone and silver. 3 days later, they rode into Silverwater. Sarah ran to her mother's waiting arms among the blooming roses. The town turned out to celebrate their return, though many still couldn't quite believe the story. "Will you stay?" Sarah asked Blackwood as their unlikely band of rescuers prepared to depart. "Continue teaching?" "For a while," he replied, "though I think my lessons might include a few more practical skills now." He touched the gun he'd learned to use, the watch he hadn't needed to trade, the spectacles that had seen so much. Cole and Morningstar rode out first, their debt still to be settled another day. Powell left a trail of small explosions in his wake, claiming they were farewell gestures of scientific significance. Florence and her performers departed with promises to include this adventure in their next show. As the sun set over Silverwater, Blackwood stood in his classroom, looking at Sarah's empty desk. Tomorrow she will be back, probably with another dime novel to share. But now she had her own story to tell. One of real heroes, imperfect but true, who had come together to prove that sometimes the most unlikely teacher could become the hero his student always believed in. And if anyone asked, he would tell them that in the end, it wasn't guns or dynamite or even clever plans that had saved the day. It was belief, in justice, in courage, and in the power of stories to show us who we might become. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.